Star Wars has no shortage of lightsaber duels. In recent productions, however, there has been a shortage of consequences arising out of these fights. In the original Star Wars films, the defeat of any character came at great cost. In some cases, the consequences of these defeats are plainly obvious. In The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon loses his life and Anakin loses the father figure he so desperately needed, and the only man who could have saved him from his dark fate. Darth Maul, ultimately defeated by Obi-Wan, is discarded by his master, losing the only purpose he has ever known, and descends into insanity. In other movies, the cost is somewhat more subtle. In Episodes 2 and 5, Anakin and Luke respectively lose a lightsaber and a hand. Earlier, in Episode 2, Obi-Wan reminds Anakin, "A lightsaber is your life." While some may argue that losing a hand is quite a small loss, as it can easily be replaced within the Star Wars universe, I would beg to differ. Quickly, from a lore perspective, these defeats result in a diminished force power due to the loss of midichlorians. However, this is only a minor cost. The true cost is much more meaningful and complex. We, as an audience, understand that losing a hand is a big deal. These characters are no longer whole, no longer unmarred. They have lost a part of themselves. Specifically, as swordsmen, losing a hand is one of the most crushing defeats possible. It renders the loser completely ineffective at defending themselves. It is the most thorough form of non-fatal defeat. In Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister is thrust on a multiple season-long journey after losing his hand, and changes greatly in the process. In Star Wars, Anakin lies in a heap with his master, while Luke jumps from a floating city to remain out of the reach of his father. Those are their only options. Stab wounds, on the other hand, are shown to heal. The characters once again become whole. Hands do not regrow in Star Wars. They must be replaced. A small part of the human becomes machine. While stabbed characters may collapse, they are not as clearly helpless as they are without a hand. There are multiple examples in media of a character being stabbed and continuing to fight. Many victories in Star Wars even come at a great cost. This is most clear in Obi-Wan's duel with Anakin in Episode 3. Obi-Wan is forced to maim his brother and accept his and the Jedi Order's complete and total failure to prevent the rise of the Empire. In Episode 6, while Luke stands over Vader, he realizes that in victory he has lost his way. He is no longer good. He must be willing to accept the most definite of defeats, death, in order to have any chance at victory. This time, he throws his lightsaber away. These are both Pyrrhic victories. They come at an incredibly large cost. Luke nearly falls to the dark, while Obi-Wan loses the two most important things in his life: his purpose, the Republic and the Jedi Order, and his family, Anakin. These victories and defeats highlight an incredibly important aspect of Star Wars as a whole. It does not glorify violence or use it as an unnecessary spectacle. It frames violence as an inevitable consequence of the natural order of the world being thrust out of balance that comes at a great cost. I'm not advocating for less lightsaber fights in Star Wars. Who would want that? What I am advocating for is important lightsaber fights, consequential lightsaber fights. The ultimate issue with Disney's version of lightsaber fights is that the combatants, even in defeat, fail to truly lose anything. The two offenders I'd like to focus on in this video are Sabine in the Ahsoka show and Reva in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. So, what do Sabine and Reva lose? Take a moment and think about it. On the surface, Sabine loses the map, but this is in no way as personal as the other losses we have seen. Functionally, she loses the object that moves the plot forward, not something that changes the composition of the characters and, as a result, the story. We, as the audience, ultimately know that this loss is temporary, as the map is the MacGuffin for the only plot thread that was established at this point in the show. After one episode, Sabine is back on her feet, good as new. After 2 episodes, she is once again in possession of the map. What does Reva lose? At first, her loss as a youngling may seem significant, but it is in no way personal. She truthfully loses nothing more than any of the other Jedi involved in Order 66. In fact, she gets away pretty easily as she manages to survive. The writers are merely using our collective investment in Order 66 to attempt to create an emotional scene without actually putting in the necessary legwork. In her second defeat at the hands of Vader, she loses, well, nothing, really. I guess you could argue she loses her shot at revenge, but then she does immediately find Bail Organa's bafflingly stupid message, which reinvigorates her quest for revenge, regardless of how stupid it may be. Either way, we know she will never succeed at killing Vader or Luke. This ultimately leads to the biggest problem these lack of losses establish: no stakes. In both Kenobi and Ahsoka, I can confidently say that I never once was worried about the impact of the events of the series on the livelihood of any of our main characters. This represents a fundamental failure to create a story that is at all interesting in it and of itself. If you were to take these stories out of the Star Wars universe, I, and many others, are not finishing them. In fact, especially when it comes to Kenobi, the only reason I finished watching the show was to know the depths of the damage the absolutely unnecessary show would do to the canon. The show was near unwatchable, in large part due to the writer's insistence on putting main characters of the Star Wars saga, Luke, Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, in life-threatening situations when we were fully aware that no harm could possibly come to them. The Ahsoka show, on the other hand, was in large part canonically inoffensive, and featured characters that have no future appearances set in stone, yet it still failed to establish any stakes. The main villain was as intimidating as a rubber duck and possessed none of the cunning that would make him a formidable foe. The looming sequel trilogy renders the supposed galaxy-endangering threats moot. And, with awareness to the series' writer, Dave Filoni clearly has ironic attachment issues to his favorite characters. In Filoni-helmed shows, characters only die when keeping them alive would create major continuity issues for the Lucas Star Wars films. Darth Maul and Kanan Jarrus needed to die as to not create incredibly conspicuous absences in the original trilogy. Before we end, I'd like to pivot back to the original topic at hand and point out how these stories could have been greatly improved if Reva and Sabine actually lost something in their lightsaber fights. As the Obi-Wan show is largely irredeemable in my book, this change would have made a very bad show simply bad, but it is nonetheless an improvement. If Vader were to have killed off Reva in the Jedi Temple, we would have had far more time dedicated to Kenobi, which would have made sense considering he is the show's titular character. If Reva were to die in their second engagement, we could have avoided the absolutely foolish attack on the Lars Homestead side quest in the series finale. But more on that and redemption in Star Wars as a whole in another video. For the Ahsoka show, Sabine suffering true loss and defeat has more tangible improvements than simply cutting out bad aspects of the show. If Sabine were to lose a hand, not only would her already low force potential be further diminished, but her morale would have descended to new lows. How could she ever compete with force wielders strength to strength, lightsaber to lightsaber? This could lead her to accept her inability to use the force and instead focus on where her strengths lie, ultimately defeating Shin down the line with her use of blasters, Beskar, and Mandalorian gadgets. This victory would feel far more earned than learning to use the Force after a few scenes of her attempting to move a cup. Or, if you want to stay on the path of her becoming a Force user, perhaps the anger and frustration she grapples with post-defeat, in addition to her decision to turn over the map to Baylan, leads Ahsoka to refuse to train her, citing her hot-headedness and attachments. Much like the other scenario, she falls into despair as she realizes she cannot compete with Force users. However, once she finds Ezra, he encourages her, and she resolves to try again. Then, a few seasons down the line, instead of episodes, she finally has a breakthrough with the Force, and in doing so saves Ahsoka, gaining acceptance once again from her former master. These hypotheticals do rely on a multitude of subsequent events, yes, but they point out the ultimate purpose of a duel, to catalyze change in our characters and set them out on a new journey. In Episode 1, Obi-Wan loses his mentor and is forced into the role of becoming one. In Episode 3, Obi-Wan fails at being a mentor and has to slay his brother. He is then tasked with becoming a protector, to live alone with the memories of his failure as his sole companion. Anakin seemingly fails to reach his destiny as the Chosen One, going from revered Jedi Knight back into the bonds of slavery from which he was once rescued. In his former slavery, Anakin built and repaired droids. In his new slavery, he has become one. In Episode 5, Luke is forced to accept the fact that his greatest enemy is a part of himself. And even if he defeats Vader, a twinkle of that overwhelming evil will live on in him. As a result, he resolves to love his enemy, turning Vader back into Anakin and snuffing out that twinkle in the process. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I'd like to upload at least once a month or more frequently if these videos do well. Did I miss anything? Do you have a different opinion? Please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.